It was a crisp morning when David Reynolds first noticed the letter. He was heading out of his small cabin, nestled deep in the wilderness, when he spotted an old, tattered envelope lying by his doorstep. For years he had been a park ranger, assigned to watch over Lake Misty's dense forest, a place few dared to explore. Solitude was his chosen life, away from the clamor of the city, and visitors were rare. So, to find a letter waiting for him was unsettling. The envelope bore no name, only a date. April 13th, 1963. David was no historian, but he knew it had been over half a century since then. Curiosity gnawed at him as he examined it, wondering if it was a prank or an accidental relic from a bygone era. As David opened the letter, he noticed the handwriting was neat and steady, with each word penned carefully, as if the writer wanted their message to endure. He began to read. To the future keeper of Lake Misty, I don't know who you are or if you'll ever read this, but if you do, I need you to know something vital. Hidden within these woods lies a truth that cannot be lost. My name is Edward Grayson, and I am, or rather was, the guardian of this lake and its secrets. If you are reading this, it means something has gone wrong. David paused. The words had a weight to them, a sense of urgency that resonated with him. Edward Grayson? The name rang a bell. David remembered stories his mentor, Jim Daniels, had told him when he first started. Jim spoke of Edward, the former ranger who'd mysteriously disappeared one stormy night, leaving behind nothing but unanswered questions. The letter continued. The truth lies in the ruins near Blue Ridge Falls. Go there and look for the stone with a compass rose etched on it. Beneath it, you'll find what you need. Please, whoever you are, promise me you'll protect it. The words ended abruptly, leaving David with a sense of unease. Who was Edward Grayson, really? And what truth could be hidden in these woods? Lake Misty was a place of beauty and serenity, but its dense fogs and eerie quiet had always hinted at something hidden, something beyond mere nature. David tucked the letter into his jacket pocket, took a deep breath, and prepared for the journey to Blue Ridge Falls. It was about a 2-hour hike, past winding trails and steep cliffs, and although he had patrolled those paths many times, he felt as if he was entering unfamiliar territory. As he walked through the thick forest, the sounds of nature, birds chirping, leaves rustling, and twigs snapping underfoot, were louder than usual, filling the silence around him. David couldn't shake off the feeling that something was watching him, observing his every move. He pushed on, his mind racing with thoughts of the hidden truth, whatever it might be. After about an hour of hiking, David's path crossed with Alex Turner, a young and enthusiastic volunteer ranger. Alex was eager to learn and had been helping David with the maintenance and patrol of the trails. Morning, David? Out for a patrol? Alex asked with a grin, his backpack slung over his shoulder, filled with field gear. Not exactly, David replied, debating whether to mention the letter. After a moment's hesitation, he handed the letter to Alex. Alex read it, his eyes widening with each line. Are you serious? This sounds like something out of an adventure book. Do you really think there's something hidden out there? David nodded. I don't know, Alex, but I can't ignore it. If there's even a shred of truth to this, I have to find out. I'm coming with you, Alex said without hesitation. David didn't argue. The company was welcome, and Alex's sharp mind and physical endurance could be an asset. Together, they continued toward Blue Ridge Falls, the weight of the letter heavy in their minds. The journey grew tougher as they neared the falls. The trail became overgrown, with tree roots and loose rocks threatening their footing. The air grew thick, and the constant drone of insects filled their ears. But they pressed on, and soon the faint sound of rushing water hinted they were close. Blue Ridge Falls was a hidden gem, a small waterfall cascading down a rocky cliff into a crystal-clear pool. David and Alex scanned the area, looking for any sign of the compass rose Edward had mentioned. It was Alex who found it, etched into a moss-covered stone partially hidden by fallen leaves. David knelt down, brushing away the debris to reveal the symbol. His heart pounded as he lifted the stone, revealing a small, weathered tin box underneath. David opened the box carefully. Inside were two items: an old map of the surrounding forest, marked with symbols and notations, and a journal, worn but intact. The cover bore Edward Grayson's initials, E.G. They flipped open the journal, scanning the pages. It wasn't a regular logbook, but a collection of notes, sketches, and entries detailing strange occurrences, sightings of shadowy figures, strange sounds at night, and areas of the forest where the trees grew in unnatural, twisted shapes. One entry stood out. April 11th, 1963. There's something in the lake. I've seen its shadow beneath the surface, something ancient and powerful. It guards these lands, keeping those who seek to harm it at bay. But there are those who would try to exploit it, to bend it to their will. I can't let that happen. The words sent a chill down David's spine. Could there truly be something lurking beneath Lake Misty? He glanced at Alex, whose face mirrored his own sense of disbelief and wonder. I think Edward was trying to protect something beyond just the land, David whispered. Maybe it's why he disappeared. He must have found something he thought was too dangerous to let the world know. They spent hours poring over the journal, each entry adding another layer to the mystery. Edward had detailed hidden traps he'd set up in certain parts of the forest to deter intruders, as well as coded messages he used to communicate with a few trusted friends. It became clear that Edward had been more than just a ranger. He had been a guardian. Night began to fall, casting long shadows across the forest. The thought of leaving weighed on them, but David knew they couldn't stay out there in the dark. Reluctantly, they returned the items to the tin box, concealing it back under the stone before heading home. They agreed to return the following day to explore more, their minds abuzz with questions. The next morning, David and Alex set out again, armed with the map and a renewed sense of purpose. They retraced Edward's path, following the symbols marked on the map. It led them to places they'd never explored, hidden clearings, and trails that had long been abandoned. As they delved deeper, they discovered more signs of Edward's work. They found crude alarms fashioned from wire and tin cans, designed to alert him to anyone approaching. They encountered strange carvings in trees and rocks, all part of Edward's elaborate system to safeguard whatever lay within Lake Misty. Days turned into weeks, and David and Alex became obsessed with uncovering the truth. They spent every spare moment in the forest unraveling Edward's mysteries. It was a test of their patience and resilience, but they felt they were closing in on something monumental. Then, one misty morning, while navigating the dense fog by the lake, they stumbled upon a hidden cave entrance, concealed behind thick vines. It wasn't marked on any map, not even Edward's. They exchanged a look, each feeling a mixture of fear and excitement. Inside, the air was cold and damp. The walls of the cave were covered in ancient markings, symbols that looked like they belonged to a language lost to time. The deeper they ventured, the more they sensed the presence of something watching them. At the end of the cave, they found it, a small stone altar, and on it, a crystal-clear orb. It looked ordinary, but as they approached, it began to glow faintly, as if responding to their presence. David reached out, feeling a warmth emanate from it, and in that moment, he understood. This was what Edward had protected, the very heart of Lake Misty's mystery. The orb contained the essence of the lake, a life force that connected all things within it. It was a power, a presence that bound the forest together, and Edward had been its guardian. They stood in awe, each realizing the responsibility they now shared. They couldn't take the orb, nor could they reveal its existence. Like Edward, they understood that some secrets are meant to stay hidden, to be safeguarded from those who would seek to use them for personal gain. As they left the cave, David and Alex made a silent vow. They would continue Edward's legacy, becoming the new guardians of Lake Misty, protectors of its secrets. The forest watched them, and they felt the weight of its trust. The mystery of Lake Misty was safe once more, hidden away, waiting for those worthy enough to find it. The salty breeze of the open sea felt refreshing as the small fishing boat, the Lucky Finn, cut through the waters off the coast of New England. Jack, Tom, and Lewis were old friends who had known each other since their teenage years. They all shared a passion for fishing, exploration, and adventure. Jack, the captain, was a burly man with a love for anything on the water. Tom was the brains of the group, a former history professor with an insatiable curiosity, while Lewis, a writer, was always in search of stories that would inspire his next novel. This trip was meant to be just another fishing excursion, but they didn't know that it would take them on a journey that would change them forever. The men were about 10 miles out when the engine suddenly began to sputter. Jack, experienced with boats, immediately cut the engine and inspected the motor. But as he checked the equipment, Tom pointed to the horizon with wide eyes. "Jack, what's that?" Tom asked, his voice barely above a whisper. In the distance, shrouded in a thin layer of fog, was an island none of them recognized. The land seemed to rise out of nowhere, with dark cliffs and dense trees. There were no such islands marked on any maps, at least not in this area, and Jack had sailed these waters countless times. Could be one of those uncharted ones, Lewis mused, already imagining the stories that could be hidden there. Or maybe it was on some old map, and then just got forgotten. Jack raised an eyebrow, doubtful. An entire island? Forgotten? Doesn't seem likely, but it is strange. Maybe we should check it out while we wait for the engine to cool. With no argument, the men paddled toward the mysterious island, feeling a strange mix of curiosity and unease. The shoreline was rocky, and the waves crashed with an almost unnatural intensity, as if warning them away, but they pressed forward, pulling their boat onto the shore and stepping onto the sand. The air was thick, filled with the scent of damp earth and something metallic. "Feels like stepping into another world," Tom murmured, looking around at the overgrown vegetation and twisted trees that seemed to lean over them. "Yeah, like a forgotten world," added Lewis, already reaching for his notebook. "I'm getting chills just looking at this place." As they wandered inland, they noticed something even stranger. There were remnants of buildings, structures made from stone and wood, half buried in the earth and obscured by vines and moss. Some looked like they had been simple houses, while others appeared to be larger, almost like a village. "These must be hundreds of years old," Tom said, crouching down to examine a piece of stone with strange carvings on it. "I've read about colonies that disappeared without a trace, but I've never heard of one around here." Jack, always the practical one, crossed his arms. "It's creepy, sure, but there's got to be some explanation. Maybe it was a settlement that didn't survive, or maybe this island was used as a prison or something." Lewis, however, felt a growing excitement. Whatever it was, it's perfect for a story. Imagine a forgotten island, lost in time, where an ancient civilization once thrived. Tom laughed. "You and your stories. Let's explore a little more. Who knows what we might find?" They ventured deeper into the forest, where the trees grew closer together and sunlight barely touched the ground. The silence was heavy, broken only by their footsteps and the occasional call of a distant bird. Suddenly, they came upon a clearing where a large stone structure stood, perhaps once a temple or meeting hall. The stone was cracked and worn, but carvings on the walls were still visible, depicting strange symbols and figures. Tom's eyes sparkled as he examined the carvings. "These symbols, they're unlike anything I've seen. It almost feels like a warning." Jack chuckled, trying to hide his own unease. A warning, huh? Maybe they were just stories to keep people away. But Lewis was enthralled. No, I think Tom's right. Look at the figures. They're all facing something. Something in the center of the island. The men exchanged uneasy glances, each of them feeling a pull to go further. It was as though the island was calling to them, drawing them toward its center. As they moved onward, they found more signs of life, or of what once was life. Broken pottery, rusted tools, and even a few scattered bones lay among the roots and leaves. What happened here? Jack wondered aloud, now feeling genuinely disturbed. These people were just wiped out. Tom was quiet, his mind racing with possibilities. Plagues, wars, disasters. Something happened, but there's no telling what. Maybe they left, maybe they all died here. Lewis shook his head, a strange look in his eyes. Or maybe they were hiding from something. The deeper they ventured, the more ominous the island felt. The air grew thick and humid, and an unnatural silence settled over them. They barely spoke, each man lost in his thoughts, until they arrived at another clearing. In the center stood a stone altar, overgrown with vines and moss, but somehow untouched by time. As they approached, they noticed markings on the altar. The symbols were similar to the ones they had seen before, but these were deeper, as though someone had carved them with purpose and urgency. Around the altar were broken weapons, old, rusted swords and spears that seemed out of place on this island. Tom's voice was a whisper. It's like they were trying to protect themselves from something. Jack looked around, his fists clenching instinctively. Maybe we should head back. This whole place feels wrong. Lewis, however, was transfixed by the altar. Guys, this is incredible. We're standing in the middle of a story no one has heard in centuries. As he reached out to touch the altar, a gust of wind blew through the clearing, cold and sharp, carrying with it a sound like distant whispering. The men froze, and for a moment, they all felt the same chill run down their spines. "Did you hear that?" Jack asked, his voice barely audible. The whispers grew louder, forming words in a language none of them recognized. The ground began to tremble, and suddenly, from the shadows of the trees, dark figures emerged, barely visible, like shadows come to life. The figures moved toward them, their shapes shifting and twisting as if they were made of smoke. "Run!" Jack shouted, his instincts taking over. The three men turned and sprinted back through the forest, the whispers echoing around them. The shadows pursued them, gliding through the trees with impossible speed. Branches scratched at their arms and faces, roots threatened to trip them, but they didn't dare slow down. As they neared the shore, Lewis tripped and fell, and Tom and Jack turned back, each grabbing an arm to pull him up. But the shadows were closing in, their dark forms swirling and growing as they approached. "Keep going!" Jack yelled, adrenaline pushing him forward. They burst out of the forest and onto the beach, where their boat was waiting. They threw themselves into the boat, pushing it into the water as fast as they could. The shadows stopped at the edge of the trees, watching them with a silent menace as they drifted away from the island. Once they were a safe distance from shore, the men collapsed, gasping for breath. The island, now shrouded in mist, faded into the distance, its secrets hidden once more. As they returned to the mainland, none of them spoke of what they had seen. But each night, they would wake in a cold sweat, haunted by dreams of shadowy figures and ancient whispers. The island had left its mark on them, and they knew they would never truly leave it behind. Years later, Lewis tried to write about the experience, but he could never find the right words. Jack became withdrawn, no longer eager to explore the seas, and Tom spent hours researching lost civilizations and ancient languages, hoping to understand what they had encountered. But some things were better left forgotten, buried beneath the sands of time, on a lonely island that no map would ever show.